My daughter pushed us off the boat. Not an accident, not a stumble. 2 hands, deliberate, and then the cold black water of Lake Champlain swallowed us whole. I am Owen Marsh. I am 69 years old. I spent 32 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon at the University of Vermont Medical Center, and I have held beating human hearts in my hands. I have seen people die on my table, and I have pulled them back. I thought I understood what it meant to fight for a life. I did not know anything until the night my own daughter looked me in the eye and let go. If you have ever loved someone completely, trusted them without reservation, and then had that trust used against you like a weapon, hit the like button right now, because what I am about to tell you is not a story about a fall. It is a story about what was waiting for us after we surfaced. We were on the water to celebrate my retirement. 40 years of medicine, 12 years as department chief. And finally, at 69, I was stepping away. My wife Judith had planned the trip herself. A long weekend on the lake aboard our family sailboat, the Patience, a 40-foot sloop I had bought the year our daughter Nora was born. The name had seemed right at the time. Nora was 36. Her husband, a man named Colt, was 41. They had driven up from Boston, all smiles and wine bottles and talk about how proud they were of me. Nora kept squeezing my arm at dinner. She kept saying, "Dad, you deserve this. You deserve all of it." I believed her. That is the part I cannot get past even now. I believed every word. The night it happened was a Friday. We had anchored in a quiet cove near South Hero Island, maybe 3 miles from the marina. The sky was clear. I remember Judith pointing out the Milky Way and Nora pretending to care while Colt refilled her wine glass. We stayed up late for us. Past 11. Then Judith went below to sleep. I stayed on deck another 20 minutes just listening to the water against the hull. I do not know what made me stay up. Maybe it was the surgeon in me, always alert, always monitoring. Maybe it was something else I cannot name. But when I finally went below to find Judith, I found her already in bed, already asleep, breathing deeply and evenly in a way that felt wrong for 11:30 at night after 2 glasses of wine. She had barely touched her 3rd glass. I stood there in the dark cabin for a moment watching her breathe. Something cold moved through me. Not fear yet, just the clinical awareness of a discrepancy. The way you notice an irregular heartbeat before you understand what it means. I went back up on deck. Colt was at the stern, his phone screen off, looking out at the water. He did not hear me come up the companionway steps. I stood there watching him for a few seconds, and I saw him check his watch. Just once. The quick, impatient gesture of a man who was waiting for something. Nora appeared from the bow with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at Colt. He nodded. One small nod, and in that moment I understood the grammar of what was happening, even if I did not yet have the words for it. I stepped back down 2 steps, keeping my head just above the hatch. Nora said quietly, "He didn't drink his." Colt said, "What about her?" Out like a light. I felt my legs go cold from the inside. She drugged Judith. She drugged her own mother. I do not know what she used. I only know that whatever Judith drank at dinner had come from a glass Nora had poured personally, making a small ceremony of it, saying, "For you, Mom, best Pinot I could find." I pressed myself against the interior wall of the companionway, my heart doing something I had not felt since my first solo surgery at 31. It was hammering in the way it only does when the body knows something the mind has not yet accepted. Then Colt said, "We go now, or we lose the window." I could have called out. I could have confronted him on deck, demanded answers, reached for my phone. But something stopped me. The same instinct that had saved patience when the easy move was the wrong move. Do not react. Observe. Know before you act. I slipped back down and lay on the bench across from Judith. I closed my eyes. I slowed my breathing down to the long, slow rhythm of sleep, a trick any surgeon learns during overnight calls. I heard footsteps on the deck above me. I heard Nora's voice one more time, too low to make out words, and then I heard Colt say clearly, "He is going to sleep it off. We have time." I had maybe 4 minutes. I pulled the life vest from under the bench without sitting up, moving slowly, by touch only. I put it on lying flat. I rolled the zipper closed without making a sound. I reached over and pressed my hand to Judith's shoulder. She stirred slightly but did not wake. I slipped the second vest around her as best I could without moving her, not fully fastened but on. I tucked the manual inflation cord into her hand and closed her fingers around it. Then I lay back down and waited. The footsteps came down the companionway. I heard Colt breathing. I heard him stop beside me. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing even. He stood there for what felt like a very long time. I felt the light of his phone screen on my eyelids checking my face. He said softly, "Yeah, out." Then he went to Judith and I heard him check her the same way. They went back up. I counted to 30. Then I followed. The deck was wet with night dew. I came up the companionway quietly and stayed low. Nora was at the stern rail. Colt was beside her. They were both looking out at the dark water, and neither of them heard me because of the wind off the lake. I heard Nora say, "The policy pays double for accidental drowning." I heard Colt say, "And the will?" She said, "Everything. The house in Burlington, the retirement accounts. He never changed any of it after I got married because he said he trusted me." She paused. "He actually said that to me last Christmas. That he trusted me completely." She said it with a small laugh. Not cruel exactly. Just absent of feeling in a way that was worse than cruelty. I do not have words for what I felt in that moment. I have tried to find it for 6 months, and I still cannot. The closest I can come is this. It was the sensation of performing surgery and realizing mid-procedure that the patient on the table is yourself. I had 1 second to decide. I could call out. I could confront them. But Colt was 41 and 200 pounds, and I was 69 with a bad left knee. And they had a plan. I had nothing but my body and 4 feet of dark deck between me and the water. I went back below. I went to Judith. I shook her as hard as I dared. She mumbled. I said her name twice, close to her ear. She blinked. Her eyes were unfocused, glassy. I pressed the inflation cord into her hand and wrapped my hand around hers, and I said, "Listen to me. Do not make a sound. Pull this if you go in the water. Pull hard." She looked at me the way people look at you in the first seconds after they wake from something heavy, not understanding, but sensing the urgency in your face. She squeezed my hand. I heard footsteps on the deck again. I let go of her hand. I moved back to the bench. I closed my eyes. Colt came down, and this time he did not pause to check us. He went straight to the forward storage hatch and came back with 2 lengths of rope I recognized from the anchor locker, the kind with enough weight to matter. I lay there listening to him move, calculating the geometry of what was about to happen, the way I used to calculate a procedure before the first incision. They did not push us down below. They dragged us up. Colt took me by the arms. Nora took my feet. I let my body go completely limp. A dead weight, the way I had trained myself to stay loose in physical situations during my residency when a patient in psychosis came off the table. It is harder than it sounds to do nothing while someone is handling you like cargo. They got me to the rail. I heard Colt grunt with the effort. I heard Nora say, "Quick," before someone on another boat sees. And then, the water. I have performed open heart surgery in a room at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I thought I knew cold. Lake Champlain in early October is a different kind of cold. It entered every opening at once, through my nose and my ears and the gap at the back of my collar, and it tried to close my chest like a fist. The shock response is involuntary even when you know it is coming. My body gasped before I could stop it. But I was wearing the vest. I came up in 10 seconds. I kept low in the water, keeping my head barely above the surface, turning myself to face the boat without splashing. I could see the hull of the patients against the night sky. I could see Colt and Nora at the rail, looking down into the water where I had gone in. I stayed absolutely still. Then I heard the second splash. Judith. I moved toward her without thinking, cutting through the water as quietly as I could, using the breaststroke, no splash, the way I had swum competitively at UVM in 1976. I found her 6 feet away, the vest keeping her up, but her arms moving weakly, her eyes wide and frightened and still not fully clear. I got my hand over her mouth before she could cry out. I pulled her close and I said into her ear, "Do not make a sound. I know what I am asking. Do not make a single sound." She looked at me for one long moment. Then she nodded. Above us on the deck I heard Nora say, "The weight should bring them down. Give it a few minutes." They did not know about the vests. They had assumed we were unconscious enough not to fight. They had assumed the weight of the water would do the work for them. They had assumed, which is the mistake that every plan eventually makes. We drifted. I kept us away from the hull, moving slowly, letting the current pull us toward the shadow of the cove's northern tree line. The cold was the biggest threat now. Hypothermia in 50-degree water begins within 30 minutes in someone not moving. I kept us moving. Small kicks, slow and quiet. I counted strokes. I focused on the tree line. I heard the sound of the boat's engine starting. I heard Nora's voice, distant now, saying something about calling the Coast Guard in an hour, giving them time to get back to the marina. They were going to report us missing. They were going to cry on the dock. They were going to perform the wreckage of their grief for whoever showed up with a flashlight and a clipboard. The shore was cold gravel and mud. We dragged ourselves onto it. Judith was shaking so hard her teeth were audible. I was not much better. I stripped off my vest, stripped off my outer shirt, and wrapped it around her shoulders. We had no phone. We had no shoes. We had a life vest each, and the clothes we had been thrown in. I knew this cove. I had anchored here 30 times over 20 years. I knew that a quarter-mile east along the shoreline there was a seasonal boat storage facility with a small office that kept a landline and an emergency kit. I had signed the guest register there more times than I could count. We walked. Judith did not complain once. I want you to understand what that means. My wife had been drugged by our daughter, thrown from a boat, pulled from a lake in the middle of the night, and she walked a quarter-mile on cold gravel without a word of complaint. She held my arm, and she walked. The facility was dark, but the emergency contact number was posted on the door. I broke the small window on the office door with my elbow, and we got inside and I found the phone on the wall, and I dialed the one number I have memorized since 1987. My oldest friend, a man named Ed, picked up on the third ring. Ed was a retired federal marshal who now ran a private security consulting firm in Burlington. We had been roommates at UVM. He had introduced me to Judith at a department party in 1981. He had been Judith's maid of honor's date at our wedding, which was a complicated arrangement that I will not explain here. The point is that Ed knew us. He knew our family. He had watched Nora grow up from the hospital delivery room to her wedding day. When I told him what happened, there was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I told him. He said, "Do not move. Do not call anyone else. I will be there in 40 minutes. Then he said quietly, "Is Judith with you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Thank God. I will be there. Stay warm." He arrived in 38 minutes with 2 wool blankets, a first aid kit, dry clothes, and the kind of expression I'd seen on his face exactly once before in 1994, when someone he trusted had deceived him badly. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at Judith. Then he said, "Tell me everything." I told him everything. By the time I finished, Ed was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at a point slightly above my left shoulder, which is what he does when he is working something through. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You have a question to answer before we do anything else." I said, "What question?" He said, "Are you looking for justice or are you looking for revenge? Because how you answer that determines everything that comes next." I thought about Nora at the rail. I thought about her voice saying he trusted me completely with that small absent laugh. I thought about Judith walking barefoot on cold gravel without a word. I said, "I want the truth on record. I want them to stand in a courtroom and have no way out. I want Judith to be safe, and I want whatever they were planning to be finished. That is what I want." Ed nodded. "That is the right answer," he said. "Now let me make some calls." Here's what Ed found out. Over the next 72 hours, while Judith and I stayed at his house outside Burlington and the Coast Guard conducted a search for 2 missing persons, presumed drowned. Nora and Colt had a second mortgage on their Brookline townhouse that was 4 months in arrears. Colt had lost his position at the financial advisory firm where he had worked for 6 years following an internal audit that discovered he had been moving client funds. The audit had been conducted quietly. The termination structured as a resignation because the firm did not want the liability of a public accusation. Colt had not told Nora. Or perhaps he had. What Ed found suggested they had known together for at least 3 months. The life insurance policy on Judith and me was a joint policy I had taken out in 2009, a standard provision for a physician with significant assets, $2 million per policyholder, with an accidental death rider that doubled the payout. Someone had contacted the insurance company 2 months prior to our trip to confirm the terms of accidental drowning coverage. That call had come from a cell number registered to Colt. He had called the insurance company to confirm the exact terms of how our deaths would pay out 2 months before he threw us in the lake. There was one more thing. Ed found it in Nora's email, through a contact he would not name, and I have never asked. 6 weeks before our trip, Nora had contacted a real estate attorney in Burlington to inquire about the process of transferring a property title following the death of both owners when there is a single surviving heir. She had used her work email. She had not thought anyone would ever look. The property she was asking about was our house. The house where she grew up. The house where her mother planted a kitchen garden every spring for 31 years. I sat with that piece of information for a long time. I am sitting with it still. Ed had a contact at the Vermont State Police, a detective named Arlene Groves who handled financial crimes and had recently worked a case involving insurance fraud. Ed called her privately, outside normal channels, and explained the situation without names first, as a hypothetical. Detective Groves listened. Then she said, "If what you are describing is documented, I can build a case. But I need the victims alive, and I need them willing to testify." I said I was willing. Judith said, "Tell her we are both willing. Tell her I want to look my daughter in the eye in that courtroom." The plan was simple because simple plans hold. Ed would contact the insurance company directly, identify himself, and flag the claim as potentially fraudulent without revealing that we were alive. The insurance company, once alerted to the possibility of fraud, would slow walk the claim and notify their own investigators. That would buy time. Detective Groves would quietly obtain Colt's phone records and the email trail from the real estate attorney inquiry. We would stay dark, stay at Ed's house, stay off every phone and account that Nora had access to until the moment was right. What we did not anticipate was the memorial. Nora arranged it in 11 days. I do not know whether to be impressed or horrified by that efficiency. It was held on a Saturday morning at the Yacht Club in Burlington, where Judith and I had been members for 20 years. She had organized a slideshow. She had ordered flowers. She had invited, by my count, 63 people whose names I recognized from the printed program that Ed obtained through a friend at the club. We watched it on a laptop from Ed's kitchen table. Someone had live-streamed it for the family members who could not travel, and the stream had not been set to private. I watched my colleagues from the hospital stand at a microphone and talk about my career. I watched the department administrator from the medical center describe the scholarship fund that had been established in my name, funded, according to her remarks, by a generous initial contribution from my daughter. I watched Nora accept condolences in a black dress with her hair up, gracious and composed, pressing people's hands between both of hers and saying, "They would have loved knowing how many people cared." I watched Colt stand beside her with his jaw set and his hand at the small of her back, the posture of a husband supporting a grieving wife. His eyes moved constantly. He was watching the room. He was watching the room. He was watching for anything that felt wrong. Then I saw something that stopped my breath. In the back row, sitting alone in a folding chair, was my grandson. My daughter's son from her first marriage, a boy named Theo, who was 11 years old and had been living with his father in New Hampshire for the past 2 years following the divorce. Someone had brought him. I do not know who made that decision or why, whether it was meant sincerely or as staging. Theo was wearing a button-down shirt that was slightly too big in the shoulders. He had his grandfather's copy of a fly fishing guide in his lap, the one I had given him 2 birthdays ago, and he was holding it with both hands like he was not sure what else to do with them. I had to leave the kitchen. I went and stood in Ed's backyard in the November cold for about 10 minutes. Judith came out and stood beside me. She did not say anything. She put her hand through my arm and we stood there together. When I came back inside, Ed looked at me and said, "Now?" I said, "Not yet. I want to hear what she says about us." Nora spoke last. She stood at the podium with one hand on the edge of it and looked out over the room with a composure that I had watched her practice since she was 12 years old. The particular composure of a person who knows how to perform emotion without feeling it, which I had always, until that moment, interpreted as strength. She said my father was the most principled man I have ever known. She paused. She looked down at her notes. She said, "He believed that you protect the people you love without being asked. That is just who he was." I watched Judith's face go very still. Nora said, "My mother gave everything she had to this family. Every single thing. She never asked for anything back." Colt reached over and took her hand. She said, "I am going to spend the rest of my life honoring what they built." I looked at Ed. He looked at me. I said, "Tomorrow." The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday morning, 10 o'clock, at the offices of our estate attorney, a man named Philip Webb, who had handled our documents for 15 years and had no knowledge of what had happened on the lake. Ed had contacted him privately the day before, without revealing we were alive, and confirmed that Nora and Colt intended to be present. They had also confirmed that the insurance company adjuster, a woman his colleague knew professionally, would be present with the initial documentation for the claim. Ed arrived at Philip Webb's office at 9:45. He was wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn the day we pulled ourselves out of the lake, the one he kept in the back of his truck for occasions that required it. He introduced himself to the receptionist as a representative of the policy underwriter, there to observe the reading and facilitate the claims paperwork. The receptionist showed him to the conference room. We arrived at 9:59. I want to describe this carefully, because people have asked me what that walk felt like, the walk from Ed's car through the parking lot and through the front door of a building where your own daughter was sitting and believing you were dead. It felt like nothing I have a name for. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was something very cold and very clear, the way the air feels at altitude where there is less of it, where every breath is deliberate. Judith walked beside me. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing at Ed's house, because we had not wanted to take anything from our home while Nora and Colt were occupying it. She had done her hair in the car using a brush Ed's wife had lent her. The bandage on her forearm, where the gravel had opened a gash when we came ashore, was still visible under her sleeve. She looked to me like the most formidable person I had ever met. We did not announce ourselves at the reception desk. We walked down the hall toward the conference room. I could hear Philip Webb's voice through the door, the preliminary professional murmur of an attorney preparing to open proceedings. I could hear Nora say something low in response. I opened the door. The room was not large. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, a window overlooking the parking lot. Philip Webb was at the head. Nora and Colt were on the left side of the table. The insurance representative, a woman I did not recognize, was on the right. Ed was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, and when the door opened, he looked up and the corner of his mouth moved slightly in a way that only I would have recognized. Nora had her back to the door. Colt was facing it. I watched the sequence of his reaction in the same way I watch a cardiac monitor, reading each phase as it arrives. First, incomprehension. His brain registered 2 people entering a room and assigned them to the category of other attorneys or staff, and began to move on. Then a second look, the kind your eyes force on you when the first reading feels wrong. Then the color left his face, starting at the forehead and moving down, the way it does when the circulatory system redirects in response to shock. He made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Nora turned. I have thought about her face many times since then. I have tried to identify what was there. There was fear, yes. But underneath the fear, before it fully arrived, there was one other thing. It was there for less than a second. It looked like relief, as though some part of her had been waiting for this, had wanted the weight of it lifted by any means, even this one. Then, the fear came and covered it. "Mom," she said. Her voice was barely audible. Then, "Dad," I said, "Hello, sweetheart." Philip Webb had risen from his chair. He was looking at us with an expression I had never seen on an attorney's face before. Somewhere between professional disorientation and the pure human shock of watching something impossible. I said, "Philip, sit down. We have a few things to tell you." Judith went to the chair directly across from Nora. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at our daughter with a steadiness that I could not have managed. She said, "Nora, I want you to listen to everything your father is about to say, and I want you to understand that I am looking at you right now, because I want to see whether you are still in there." Nora began to cry. "I do not know whether it was genuine. I do not know whether it matters." I reached into the inside pocket of Ed's jacket, which he had lent me that morning. I placed a small digital recorder on the table. I placed the printout of Colt's call to the insurance company on the table. I placed the printed copy of Nora's email to the real estate attorney on the table. I said, "We did not drown." Colt stood up. He said something. I do not remember what it was. Ed stepped forward from the window, and Colt sat back down. I said, "You pulled us off the deck of my boat. You went back to the marina, and you waited. You reported us missing, and you arranged a memorial, and you sat in the front row of that memorial, and you let 63 people grieve for us. And then you came to this office today to collect what you thought you had earned." The insurance representative had her phone out. She was not recording. She was calling someone, turning away slightly toward the window. Philip Webb was writing on his legal pad with a hand that was not entirely steady. Colt said, "You have no proof of anything." He said it quickly, the reflex of a man who has thought about exactly this contingency. I looked at him. I thought about 32 years of surgery, about the particular discipline of remaining calm in a room where someone is dying, and you are the only person who knows what to do. I pressed play on the recorder. The sound of the boat. The sound of Nora's voice, close and clear, saying the policy pays double for accidental drowning. The sound of Colt's voice saying, "And the will," everything. I let it run. I let him hear themselves. I let Philip Webb and the insurance representative and the empty chairs hear it. When it finished, the room was quiet. Nora had stopped crying. She was looking at the recorder on the table. Her hands were flat on the surface in front of her, completely still. Colt looked at her. It was the look of a man searching for something he had believed was there and finding it gone. She did not look back at him. Detective Groves and her partner were in the parking lot. Ed sent a text message. They came through the front door 90 seconds later. When they led Colt out in handcuffs, he did not say anything. He looked straight ahead. Whatever he had told himself about how this would end, this was not it. Nora walked out on her own. She did not have to. She chose to. When she passed me in the doorway, I stepped aside and she stopped, just for a moment, without turning her head. She said, "I did not want it to be this way." I said, "I know." She said, "I did not know how to ask for help." I said, "Yes, you did. You just decided not to." She walked out. I will tell you what happened after, because I believe in finishing things completely. Colt entered a guilty plea to attempted murder in the second degree and insurance fraud. He is serving 17 years. His attorney argued that Nora had been the initiating party, which the evidence did not entirely contradict. The prosecutor agreed to a reduced charge for Nora in exchange for her full cooperation and testimony. She was sentenced to 8 years. She has been in a facility in St. Albans for 4 months now. Her son Theo is with her father in New Hampshire, where he has a stable home and a dog and a school he likes. We have a letter from him that arrived 3 weeks ago. He drew a picture of a boat on the back of the envelope. I have it on my refrigerator. The house is sold. Judith did not want to go back to it. We did not want the money from it to feel like anything. It went into a trust with Theo, administered by Ed until the boy is 25. We kept enough to buy what we actually needed. What we needed was a smaller house, closer to the water, a screened porch, a kitchen garden, time, which turns out to be the only luxury worth anything. Judith planted tomatoes in April. I finished the fly fishing book I had promised myself I would read for 6 years. We eat dinner before it gets dark. We have learned, both of us, to take nothing for granted that was not earned. I think about Nora. I will always think about Nora. I think about who she was when she was 7 years old, carrying a bucket of lake water up from the shore, very serious about the task. I think about the person she became and all the small turns along the way where I told myself she was fine, she was finding her way, she was just difficult in the way that gifted people are sometimes difficult. I think about the night at the rail when I heard her say that he trusted me completely and laugh with nothing behind it. And I think about her face in Philip Webb's office, that half second before the fear, when something that looked like relief had moved through her and vanished. I do not know what that was. I do not know if I will ever know. What I know is this. I spent 32 years keeping hearts beating in other people's chests. I know what it means to fight for a life. I know the cost of it, and I know what it is worth, and I know the difference between a life that is saved and a life that is only continued. Judith and I are living, not continuing, living. If someone in your life has made you feel like your love for them is a liability, like your trust is a resource to be harvested, like your survival is inconvenient to their plans, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to survive. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to let go of the person they used to be in order to deal honestly with the person they are. Blood is not a debt you owe. Family is something you build with people who will stay on the boat. This is Owen Marsh, telling you from a screened porch in Vermont on a Tuesday evening in May, with the light coming through the trees and my wife in the garden 20 feet away, that it is never too late to choose your own life over someone else's plan for it. Subscribe if this reached you. Leave a comment about where you are watching from. And if you have ever had to make a choice like the one Judith and I made, tell me your story. I read everyone. Until next time, watch the water, know your exits, and never let anyone convince you that your life is theirs to manage. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say the water, the cold, the dark, the not knowing if Judith was going to surface, and yes, that was terrible in a way I do not have adequate language for. But the hardest part was not the lake. The hardest part was the 11 days between the night they threw us in and the morning we walked into Philip Webb's office. 11 days of watching from a distance while our daughter arranged flowers and ordered a slideshow and accepted condolences from 63 people who genuinely loved us. 11 days of understanding, slowly and completely, that this had not been a moment of desperation. It had been a plan, a careful, patient, logistically organized plan. And plans require time. Plans require intention. Plans require a person to look at another person, someone who raised them and loved them without condition, and make a choice. That is the thing I keep coming back to. The choice. Nora was not cornered the night she stood at that rail. She was not acting out of some sudden break from herself. She was acting in complete accordance with who she had decided to be, possibly for longer than I want to calculate. The moment I heard her say, "He trusted me completely," with that small laugh that held nothing, I understood that the person I had been grieving, the daughter I thought I knew, had not disappeared recently. She had been gone for a long time. I had just been too close to see the absence. I think about the cause and the effect of it, not in any mystical sense, but in the plain mechanical way that a surgeon thinks about a body. Actions accumulate. Small dishonesties compound. The habit of taking without acknowledgement, of receiving love and filing it away as something old rather than given, does not arrive fully formed. It builds, Every time Nora accepted something from us and calculated its value instead of its meaning, every time Colt chose the shortcut over the honest path, they were making themselves into people who were capable of what they eventually did, not because they were born that way, because they practiced. And on our end, Judith and I practiced something too. We practiced not looking too hard at the things that made us uncomfortable. We practiced the particular parental optimism that reframes warning signs as phases. I told myself she was complicated. I told myself gifted people push limits. I was a surgeon for 32 years, and I knew how to read the data in a body. And I chose, repeatedly, not to read the data in my own family. That is not self-pity. That is just the honest accounting of it. What I know now, from the other side of it, from the screened porch and the kitchen garden and Theo's drawing of a boat on my refrigerator, is that intelligence without integrity is not a gift. It is a liability. Nora was smart enough to plan. She was not wise enough to understand that every action she was taking was making her into someone who could not come back from it. Colt was resourceful enough to cover his professional failure for months. He was not honest enough to ask for help before it became something that required covering. And Judith. I want to say something about Judith because she is the part of this story I'm most proud of. She walked a quarter-mile on cold gravel in wet clothes in the middle of the night without a word of complaint, and then she sat across a table from the daughter who had drugged her and looked at her with steady eyes and said, "I want to see whether you are still in there." That is not stubbornness. That is not performance. That is a person who knows exactly who she is and refuses to be diminished by what someone else decided to do with her love. That kind of resilience does not come from nowhere. It comes from a lifetime of choosing, small choice by small choice, to be honest about what you see and clear about what you value. Judith built herself into someone who could survive that night. I am still learning from her. If there is anything I want you to take from what happened to us, it is this: your clarity is your protection. Not suspicion, not defensiveness, but the simple daily practice of seeing people accurately, including the people you love most, including yourself. We do not do our families any favors by refusing to look at them honestly. And we do not do ourselves any favors by confusing loyalty with blindness. Owen Marsh, signing off from Vermont on a Tuesday evening in May. The light is good. The tomatoes are coming in. We are fine.